Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. If you've watched any previous videos, you know that I've outlined the curriculum that I have planned for my kids for the 2020 and 2021 school year. I had a request to go through and just kind of have a flip through some of the first language lessons curriculum. So that's what this video is. I'm going to do a flip through of level 1, level 2, and level 3 of the first language lessons for a well-trained mind. So if you're interested, stay tuned. I'm just going to do a brief flip through each of these different levels. Alright guys, so we're going to go ahead and start with the first language lessons for the well-trained mind, level 1. You can look at the binding and you can tell that obviously level 1 is on top, then level 2, and then level 3, that we're obviously getting a little thicker, a little more involved with each level as you go up. And so I'm just going to go ahead and start with level 1. And when we come in, you'll see the table of contents, and I'm just going to kind of hold it here for a second. So if you want to pause the video and be able to kind of look at the table of contents, that you're able to do so. But I want to point out a couple of things. When you see the words as they're a little darker, that's when you're introducing something that's new. And when they are a little lighter shaded, those are things that are review. So you'll notice that some lessons are introducing some newer stuff and have review, whereas other lessons are completely reviewing concepts that you've already covered. So in the first 18 lessons here, you can see we're covering common nouns. We're doing some poem memorization. We are doing common and proper nouns, and we also have some story narrations and picture narrations. So here now you'll be able to see these lessons. And the same thing, covering just different topics, but also having some picture narrations, story narrations, still covering proper nouns. Moving over here, we're starting to introduce verbs. Hold it here so you're able to see anything. On this page, we're going to do some more story narration, introducing seasons and abbreviations, talking about titles of respect, more abbreviations, pronouns, capitalizations. So you can kind of pause at any point if you want to see maybe what some of these lessons are covering. I'm just trying to point out some highlights of how you progress through the year. You can see at the end you are doing a lot of review from prior lessons. And even at the end here, we start looking at different types of sentences and statements, commands, questions, exclamations. So that's your table of contents, and each book has one of those. And then they all also contain this section where it's talking about how to use the book, the method of the book. And then it even comes over here. I want to point this out. It's in each of them, but remember that exposure, not mastery, is the goal at this level. And then it also talks about the tools that are used in this book, the 4-strand approach, meaning memory work, that you're going to be memorizing some short poems and brief rules and definitions. We're going to do some copy work. Now, if you watched my previous video, you'll note that I did not do the copy work because we were already covering some copy work in a different curriculum. We have some narration, which will be some picture narration and story narrations, and then grammar, where we're going to be learning the rules of grammar. And that's covered in each one, as well as how to use the lesson, where it's telling what your instructor might say, that the student is in italics, that there's a note to the instructor, and that there's also maybe suggested wording, and then definitions are in bold print. And then after that, you immediately head into lesson 1. And so here we're talking about nouns. So if any point you notice that I have crossed out something, it's not that what they have is incorrect. It is that we also do some memory work with our classical conversations memory work. And I didn't want to have two separate definitions. So we just are going with our classical conversations guide, and I crossed out this one. Again, you can tell that they're pretty much the same exact thing, but I didn't want to confuse them with having them out of different order or different words. So I just stuck with our classical conversations definition. But here you're going to start seeing the layout of all the lessons, and they're all similar. So this is where they're introducing a concept, and over here this is what it's going to look like when we do a poem memorization. So some notes to the instructor, how many times to go over it, and maybe some suggestions of how to do so. But then here's your poem. And then over here, here's just another lesson, another example of what you're doing. The instructor's saying, what you'll say together, maybe the student would say, and then you have your definitions again in bold. So again, the lessons are all very similar in style. Here's an example of a story narration. So again, some notes to the instructor, and then this is what you're going to read, The Rabbit and the Turtle. Finish the story over here, and then just some questions to ask the child to make sure that they were able to understand the story, that they understood the moral, just different things like that. Some more just regular lessons where you're going over the definitions, talking about the different definitions for common and proper nouns. And you'll see too up here, it would tell you if you wanted to do your poem review and even what lesson to go to. Now here's an example of what the picture narration would look like. So the child's going to look at the picture, and then you have this little tidbit over here of what you're going to say, a little bio of the artist, and maybe some just information of where it was painted, where they lived, or how old the painting is, and then has some questions just to ask them on their observation of the painting. But sometimes it'll go beyond that. For example, it'll say, you can't really see what the other little girl is doing, meaning this girl, and it'll say, you can use your imagination. What do you think she might be doing? So you're asking them to use their imagination. And then over here, well, I guess I can back up here. It says that what kind of noun is a girl? So it's kind of applying the lessons that you've learned. You would say it's a common noun. And then it comes up here and says the special proper names of these two girls are proper nouns, but we don't know what they are. So use your imagination, and you could have them come up with some pretend names. So those are some examples of what the picture narrations and story narration, but the lessons follow this basic similar structure. And if I flip forward to the end, you'll see that sometimes we're going to see, you have an oral usage exercise for them to do. And maybe sometimes there'll be some enrichment activities or things that they can do some copy work. Here's a copy work example where they could do some. We rarely did the copy work because, again, we were covering that in a different curriculum. But you'll see still some other enrichment activities. So those just kind of continue on. We have just different lessons, and these are very short and sweet. We're talking 5-10 minutes tops of how long it's going to take these, because they're, by and large, just an oral lesson. So you'll see they all are following that same structure. So that is level 1. All right, now moving on to level 2, I'll go ahead and start out the same way so you can have a look at the table of contents, set up in pretty much the exact same way, where the bold items are the new material and the lighter items are review. And you're going to see that we're still covering things like nouns and verbs and linking verbs, but you're just going to notice that as we progress, we're going to progress a little bit more quickly and cover a little bit more ground. But we're still covering story narrations, and we still have picture narrations as well. So I'll give you some. Now we're really coming down to parts of speech here, going over conjunctions. Going to talk about how to address an envelope. Still going to be doing adverbs, writing postcards. Again, just trying to highlight some of these. If at any point you want to pause so that you can see what the table of contents is going to be covering, you're able to do so. We're going to be covering prepositions, adjectives and adverbs. We'll be introducing synonyms and antonyms, still doing poem memorization and picture narrations all throughout the course. And again, landing at about 100 lessons and doing a lot of review at the end. Has the same introductory material of how to use the book, so you wouldn't need just the first one. And again, the lessons are looking very much the same, where you have the instructors to say this and the student can say, you know, it'll give you examples. A lot of times it's not gonna, you won't get the exact answer from the student, but those are just some ideas of what you'll do. Still have poem memorization. The Goops is a fun one for my kids. They love the Goops. They can still recite it to this day. Here we have verbs, talking about different verbs. They'll memorize some lists. You'll see some lists here where we're talking about our state of being verbs, and they'll have it in a chant form. Linking verbs. So lessons are going to get a little longer and a little bit more in depth, a little more challenging material, but again, still usually not going beyond 5 to 10 minutes, as long as, at least in our case, when we're not doing any copy work, and a lot of times we weren't doing a lot of the enrichment activities because this was more of a supplement to our curriculum. Here's a story narration. So you'd read the story and then have the questions for the child. So here are some, going over some linking verbs where we're referring to that story that we just read, and they're going to point out some of the linking verbs. And see here, we'll have some copy work, but again, we didn't cover that. But the lessons are just following a very similar style. They will have notes up for the instructor if you would like to read those, copy work examples. Another poem. You'll see here some of my additional writing because we learned a song about a helping verb that memorized those. So we were going to memorize them in the order we'd already practiced them. Trying to scroll through here and find a picture. Oh, here we go. So same idea as level 1, where we're doing a picture narration where they're looking at the piece of art. They have a bio about the artist, when it was painted, maybe where they painted it, and then some questions to ask the child. So again, it's following a very similar style. If I jump forward, here's a poem. More review at the end. So that's level 2. Very similar to level 1, just covering a little bit more information. So let's go ahead and move on to level 3. Now, level 3, I did say was a little bit thicker, and it's going to cover a little bit more material. So I'll go ahead and hold that over here so you can see the table of contents. Again, still kind of covering, you know, starting out with very similar items, nouns, action verbs, doing some narration. We're going over a definition of a sentence, and even going to start working. And this one, the way that this one differs is that it does start to go into diagramming sentences, which we did not cover in the previous 2. So you'll see the adverbs, poem memorization still, going over initials and abbreviations, quote, different types of quotations, some poems, contractions, narrations. And you're going to see, you'll see like new interjections with diagramming. So then at the end here, you even have some writing letters lessons, some dictionary skills lessons, as well as oral usage lessons, some reference materials. So once you, again, going through how to use the lessons, just some extra reading. But then again, you're going to see that the lessons are very much looking similar to level 1 and level 2. You have optional dictation exercises. We would occasionally do those. Mainly because they were a little bit different. You'll see in the end, as we get further back, it was because a lot of these exercises were with the beginning of sentence diagramming. And what's great about this book is that I had never been introduced to sentence diagramming in my own school. And so when I came upon this, I was really overwhelmed. And they did a very good job of walking you through just slowly adding things, making very basic sentences and slowly adding onto them. And if they ever had any extra like here, like for your workbook, we didn't have the workbook. We just used some scrap pieces of paper. And what was great was there was an answer key. So anytime they had any exercises, the answers are in here. So even if you don't want to buy the workbook and just use your own notebook paper, you're able to check the answers if you're not quite confident enough to be able to go through those. For me personally, I wasn't, because I had never before been introduced to sentence diagramming. So that's really the biggest difference with level 3 as compared to level 1 and 2, is that you're taking all of your parts of speech now that you've learned in levels 1 and 2, and you're actually starting to use them in diagramming. So that's one of the biggest differences. We're still doing a lot of the recitation of, what is a noun, what is a verb, what is an adjective or an adverb. But beyond the memorization that we did in 1 and 2, now we're actually applying it in level 3 and starting to do some sentence diagramming. So I would say that's the biggest difference. You would be able to look through, you're still getting, what is a preposition, and going through the definitions. We're looking at some examples of prepositions, being able to find them in a sentence. Again, we didn't have the workbook, but if I needed to, I would just write the sentences on a dry erase board or on a scrap piece of paper, and they would pick them out. And then same with any diagramming that we were doing, we would just do that on an extra sheet of paper. So again, these might take the lessons where you're doing more of the diagramming, they're going to take a little bit longer. I would say maybe 10 to 15 minutes per lesson, but they're still not unreasonably long. So I thought they were doable, especially to add them on with just the other things that we were already covering in our different curriculum. So here's another example of something that we're reading, a narration, and then answering some questions, but still following a very similar style as to level 1 and 2. So that's level 3. All right, guys, thanks for joining me as I walked through the different levels of the first language lessons. As always, if you have any questions, if you would like to see a flip through of a different curriculum piece or material item that I have, just let me know in the comments below. I'd love to do that for you. I hope you guys are doing well and have a blessed day.